Welcome to live.withcode.uk. This is season 4, which is aimed at Year 11 computer science students who want a little bit of help and extra support with some of the harder Python skills, particularly for the Edexcel on-screen Python test. Last week we looked at decomposition, so we started with a challenging problem, which was how to read data from a CSV file, analyze that data, display it in a table, and then draw some pie charts using turtle graphics. But before we actually worry about the implementation of that, last week we only did decomposition, breaking that big problem down into smaller chunks. So that meant that we defined or declared, we said that they exist, some procedures and functions, some smaller parts of the program, so that we could use them. So what do we want our program to do? We want to load from a file and store the data that we get. We want to pass that data into another function so we can count how many pies we've got in total. We then want to display a table of all of those pies and display a pie chart. So today we're going to start implementing some of these procedures and functions. So I'm not going to start from a blank canvas today. I'm going to start from where we left off in episode 1. And we'll mostly implement count pies. But count pies requires a parameter called ppydata. That means the data that we're passed in here, which is going to be loaded from a file. Now, I'm not going to actually load it from a file today. We'll do that, I think, in episode 4 of this 5-part series. Instead, we're just going to hard code it in to get a 2-dimensional data structure, and that's what we're focusing on today. How to create a data structure and iterate through that data structure. So the data that I want in it is currently in the file. Ultimately, we'll read it directly from the file in the program, but now I'm just going to put it straight in. And we have a string, which is the name of the pie, and then we have a number, an integer, which is how many of those pies someone has ordered. So we are going to structure that data into a list, a 1-dimensional list, but we've got multiple types of pies. So we're going to make a 2-dimensional list, which is just a list of lists. So let's see, we need this to be a string, and that's the end of that individual list. We'll add another list in, so there are 3 pies with a total of 55 pies being ordered. So here we have a local variable called data. It's a 2-dimensional data structure. 2-dimensional means it needs 2 indices to access it. For example, data 0 is going to get the first pie and the quantity of pies. And then you can have another indexing expression. So the 1 here means it's not the name I'm interested in, it's the quantity of pies I'm interested in. So the first 0 is which pie you're interested in, and the second indexing expression is which value within that list. Okay, so I know I haven't read from a file, but at least it should now return this 2-dimensional data structure so that that can be stored as this global variable called pies. I should probably set this up here, just initialize it to a blank list. Then that can be passed in to a function called count pies. So this is where we need to iterate through this data structure. Now, I'm not going to iterate through each pie in data, because this is a local variable that only exists within the scope of this function. I'm not going to iterate through pies, which is a global variable. I could, it would work, but it would be bad practice. I want to make sure everything just works in its own individual place, which means our code is going to be more reusable by just using the parameter. So for each pie in our pie data, I want to total up these second numbers. So what is pi? Pi is the 1-dimensional lists that make up the 2-dimensional list. So the 1-dimensional list, we can just say which value we want in it. It's not the first value, it's the second value. It's index 1, because remember we start counting from 0. And we want to add all of these numbers. So I need to make sure the total increases by that amount. This isn't going to work yet because we don't know what total is. So at the start of the function, we should initialize total to 0. So set the value of total to 0. Kind of works, but we're returning a 0 instead of the value that we calculate. So we just need to put total in there. And it still doesn't look like it does anything because it never does anything with that value. We return the total, which means we get a value back from here and we can store it in here. This is now a global variable called total. I should probably put this in here, set it to the data type that we're interested in, which is an integer. But I've got some confusion now because I've got a local variable called the same thing as a global variable, and they are different. So just to save any confusion, I'm going to call this total pies because it's the local variable we're using here. That variable gets passed back and stored as a global variable here. Why does that help us? Because now we can pass this value as a parameter to our next function, or next procedure, sorry, because this doesn't return a value. And although we won't actually display it as a nice table in this episode of Live with Code, we will just say the total. So total number of pies is p total. Now I've not called it total here. I could have done because it's a global variable, but it's much better to use parameters so that your code can be reused from one project to another project later if necessary. So there we go, we've got a total number of pies. You have a couple of challenges. You can add in your own choice of pie. So you could add something into your data structure, so you've got 4 types of pie in here if you want. Or even without the string formatting to make it lined up, you could have a go at implementing a display table, so it iterates through each pie in that 2-dimensional list and displays the number of pies that somebody has ordered. And then next session, we will go through string formatting to display all of that data nice and neatly. Hope that's helpful. All the very best. You'll find links in the description to all of the code resources and the activities that go alongside with it. Bye-bye.